All right. Good morning. And David, really wonderful job. And what we talked about is, I'm Simone Boe, by the way, and I'm coordinator of political organizing with the Washington Education Association. And I'm actually thrilled because there are several educators here in the audience. If you're an educator, would you just raise your hand? Thank you, thank you, thank you for the work that you do. And if you were to believe the media, you're actually not doing the work that you're supposed to. But we know in our hearts that that's not true. What we wanted to do as a panel is really set the stage. We wanted David to provide that sort of, these groups are trying to take away the American dream. I'm going to talk a little bit about this very certain segment of public education, and then Greg's going to wrap it up with continued attacks and then what we can do going forward. So I work for the Washington Education Association, and we represent about 80,000 members, teachers, school employees, bus drivers, all across the state. And we're part of the National Education Association, which represents 3.2 million workers in our public schools. And today I'm really going to talk about ed policy, but as the WEA and as the NEA, we're feeling ALEC's effects and influence on two fronts, ed policy and on union busting. And today I'm not going to specifically cover the union attack since my colleagues here will, but our affiliates in Wisconsin, Ohio, Michigan, and others are being attacked systematically. They're being dismantled systematically. And overall, we're starting to see declining membership because people are working harder and harder to just stay alive and make ends meet, and it's harder and harder for them to join their union. It's harder, literally, to join their union, and the ALEC effect is really being successful. So while we're not covering that here specifically, some of ALEC's legislation is just evil, right? It really is. It is evil. And when you start to unravel this, David said, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. And he's absolutely right. What they're doing sounds like a conspiracy, but they're actually doing it. And so we need to be so vigilant about what's happening. One of these model legislation pieces, it's just so benign sounding. So the Teacher Choice Compensation Act, sure, teachers would choose to be compensated. This piece of legislation as a model would go into a state and basically say, as a teacher, you can choose to get additional compensation, but you must first leave the current collective bargaining agreement that you have, and then you'll get this extra compensation if you meet certain criteria. Who knows who defines the criteria? Who knows how you know if you meet that criteria? And so basically, one by one, they're looking to have people, if they're not able to be successful at that state and national level defunding the unions, they're going to do it individual by individual. And so these are the sort of pieces that are coming out of ALEC, and it really is, it is just evil. I'll leave it at that. So ALEC has this self-described legislative approach. How many of you have ever played whack-a-mole at the county fair? So this sophisticated group has talked about their education policy and legislative agenda as a game of whack-a-mole. And they've said those unions have been successful at knocking down certain pieces of, quote, education reform. How many of you have heard education reform? We need to reform the system. And so as a union here in Washington State in particular, we've had to battle reform after reform that fundamentally would hurt our members and hurt the million students here in Washington State. So this whack-a-mole approach, they've said, well, they'll be successful if there's one mole. But if there's several moles, they can't possibly cover all of them. They said that person with the mallet cannot get every mole, and some of that bad reform will get through. So they've got this whack-a-mole legislative agenda that really starts to be sort of deliberate all across the states. And all of our state affiliates are fighting different sorts of education reform that work to ultimately privatize our public education system. So their legislative agenda really is based on what's best for corporations. It is not about our students. It is not about the people who work within the system. It really is about the benefit of corporations. And really they want to dismantle public education, make a profit out of it, and dismantle our unions. And I want to just stop and have you think for a moment, why is it in their interest to dismantle the unions. And I'm going to come back to that at the end of this. So their ed policy, and it is long. So, but just to highlight a couple, it's privatization, parent trigger. Did anyone go see that movie? Don't go see that movie. It won't back down. Is all about the parent trigger model. They have cyber school legislation, teacher certification and evaluation legislation, funding and assessment, and those are just to name a few. So I think sometimes, as teachers, we like to share examples, and one of the most egregious examples of this ALEC model legislation going from development actually being implemented is an example in Tennessee, and Brendan, the first Brendan, touched on this just a little bit. And so there's model legislation called the Virtual Public Schools Act, and when this Virtual Public Schools Act was being developed, one of the people who was the lobbyist for K-12 Inc., Brendan talked about it, and someone else from Connections Inc., were the corporate chairs of the Education Task Force. And so they decided, what a great idea. Let's come up with model legislation that puts forth cyber schools, and let's see what happens. So they created this model legislation to have cyber schools within school districts. 2 legislators in Tennessee, a House member and a Senate member, pushed this legislation, brought it to their houses, and it passed. It passed on a party line. And here's the thing that is the evil part. This K-12 Inc. then got a no-bid contract with the Union County School District to build Tennessee Virtual Academy. They had 2,000 students. It passed in June 2011. The next fall, they had 2,000 students enroll. Each student brought public funds of $5,300 per student. And when you look at the students who remain in those schools, they suffer. The funding goes down. And then this for-profit company has your public money to do what they want with. And the killer is that this corporation then awarded their CEO $2.6 million. Why not? Their CFO $1.7 million, and many of their top executives fees and compensation in the hundreds and thousands of dollars. And at that same time, our public schools were being drained of resources. And so when you talk about examples of ALEC working to systematically dismantle public education, you can reference that Virtual Public Schools Act as just one model in particular. So the other thing that's scary is you think, well, it's happening in Tennessee, it's happening in Florida. Well, it's happening here. And there are 3 bills in particular that started in our Senate in their original form as very, very model ALEC legislation bills. I'm going to talk about one in particular. It's Senate Bill 5329. And this basically, it says, I had the specific language, it says they want to seek local control of school boards, and they had a bill introduced that would basically take away local control from the school board for failing schools and push it up to a state superintendent district. And this state superintendent district would then have to contract with a learning management organization. Oh, a nonprofit corporation, but a learning management organization. And so if you are in a failing school, and again, who's creating the criteria? By what standard are these failing schools being measured? So you're in a failing school, and all of a sudden your district tells everyone in that failing